Okay, we are reading chapter 19 today, and it's titled Big Bucks. Everybody can hear me? It rained that afternoon. Aunt Queenie drove off somewhere. Uncle Bert curled up for a nap, and I was left with Punky, who cried because I couldn't stop the rain. He sat at the dining table, twisting his hair while I pretended to call the news 3 times. The rain drizzled down, filling up Aunt Queenie's outside flower pots and washing muddy water across the patio. As I stood looking out the double doors, I had an idea. Punky, remember the mud mats Rudy makes? Yeah, he said, wiping his face with his sleeve. Rudy's my friend. If it didn't rain, nobody'd ever need mud mats, and he'd be out of a job. Boss would have to send him home. Punky looked at me with his puppy dog eyes. Rudy cry. He'd cry if it didn't rain, but I'll bet he's laughing now. Punky folded his arms on the table and thought about that for a minute. Then he smiled, opened his lunchbox, and started lining up his clowns. I sat down and leafed through the Sunday paper. In a little while, Aunt Queenie came home. She shivered as she hung her dripping jacket on the coat rack and removed the scarf from her hair. After pouring herself a cup of coffee, she sat down with Punky and me and said, "Those Shacklefords seem like nice children." What brought that up? I wondered without saying anything. Tria and Avenel are so good to help with Special Olympics, and Avenel is looking after Miss Myrtle Chambers, who's been having fainting spells. Her mother said she spends... Suddenly, I was suspicious. When did you talk to Mrs. Shackelford? I just came from there. I always call on new members of the church. I meant to go sooner, but what else did she say about Avenel? That she's lonely here. She doesn't fit in. Gardenia, Mrs. Shackelford, said you and Avenel seemed to hit it off for a while, but then something went wrong. We had a misunderstanding at school. Can you straighten it out? Asked Aunt Queenie. Not likely. But you'd have someone your own age to laugh with, to share your troubles with. Before, you had Punky, but now he's branching out on his own. Bert and I are here, of course, but you don't talk to us. You've kept everything bottled up inside since Shirley and Sam. It's not good for you. I'm okay. You've both been through the fire, to speak. You losing your mom and dad, and Avenel facing the shame of having a father in prison. Aunt Queenie chuckled at my look of astonishment. Yes, I know about that. Gardenia confided in me. She said her husband was wrongly convicted. And so was I, when Avenel caught me holding that letter. I folded the newspaper and got up. It wasn't fair. If everybody already knew about Mr. Shackelford being in prison, why had Avenel blown up at me over something that wasn't my fault? On Friday, when I got home from school, Punky stuck a slip of paper in my face and said, "Look, DJ, my dollar." What's that? It's his first paycheck, said Aunt Queenie cheerfully. I took the check from Punky and saw that it was made out to Richard Holloway for $48. That's not much money for 2 weeks' work, I said. Well, to him, it's a fortune. He's rich as a king. My dollar, Punky said, removing the check from my hands and stashing it in his lunchbox. Every few minutes he'd haul it out and show me again, but he wouldn't let me touch it. I sat sipping a Coke and thinking how much he'd changed since he'd been at the workshop. His bald spot had sprouted wiry brown hair, and he'd stopped chewing on his fingers. He even went to bed earlier, and every morning when his feet hit the floor, he was a man with a purpose. When Uncle Bert came home, Punky met him at the door and waved the check at him, saying, "My dollar!" "Well, this calls for a celebration," exclaimed Uncle Bert. He yelled into the kitchen, "Queenie, whatever you got on the stove, take it off. We're going out to eat." On the way to the restaurant, Uncle Bert stopped at the supermarket and insisted that we all go in while Punky cashed his check. "This is a big day for Punk Man," he said, "and I want everybody to see it." At the cashier's window, he showed Punky where to make an X on the check and signed his name for him. Sliding the check under the glass, he said, "Give it to us in ones." The clerk, a short, plump man with a yellow shirt and plaid suspenders, squinted at the check and frowned. "Did you say ones?" "I haven't got that many in my drawer." "Clean out the register," said Uncle Bert. "We've got to have ones." Grumbling to himself, the clerk stepped out of the office. It took several minutes for him to make change at the registers, and when he came back, he tried to count out the money to Uncle Bert. "Not to me," said my uncle. "My dollar," said Punky, holding out his hand. As the clerk looked peeved, counted the money into Punky's head, Punky's eyes got bigger and bigger. 46, 47, 48, finished the man, rudely slapping the last dollar on Punky's hand and turning to walk away. Punky reached out and snapped his suspenders. "Thank you, buddy," he said. "You're fat." We ate supper at the seafood restaurant, and afterward Uncle Bert drove to a furniture store. "Bail out," he said, and I wondered what else he had up his sleeve as we got out of the car. Taking Punky's hand, I followed my aunt and uncle to the television department. "Now, Punk Man," said Uncle Bert, rubbing his hands together, "let's pick out the one we want." Punky didn't say a word. He was hypnotized by all the TVs running at once, and he paid no attention to the salesman who had come to talk to us. Uncle Bert and Aunt Queenie chose a portable color TV with a remote control and a price of $300. The salesman carried it up front. As I dragged Punky along after them, he looked back over his shoulder, still staring at the bank of TVs. "Punk Man," said Uncle Bert, "here's where you spend the big bucks. Show the man your money." "My dollar," replied Punky, setting his lunchbox on the counter and flipping open the lid to show off his pile of ones. As he lined them up on the counter, I noticed Aunt Queenie writing out a check to cover the difference. When I checked on Punky at about 9:30, I found him propped up in his bed, watching television. He pointed a stubby finger at the TV. "My show." "You look awfully busy." "Yeah, DJ," he said, grinning as he punched the buttons on the little black box and changed the channel by remote control.